I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the legacy that's being left for future generations, just having being a new mother, and yesterday in one of the talks somebody mentioned that even if we cut off all use of fossil fuels tomorrow, we still have a 30-year legacy of impacts of climate change coming at us, so that even if we take drastic actions now, there's still going to be this legacy for future generations. So I was wondering,
did I do something so crappy as have a kid?
no, not necessarily.
Well, I mean, I consider having a kid an act of faith, and I didn't for a long time. In part because it seemed somewhat unfair to the kid. I don't feel pessimistic right now. I think it's actually it was an amazing year to have a child. You know, there was so much resistance and so many movements. I found out that I was pregnant while I was at Occupy Wall Street, and I mean, there's no doubt that there's a very difficult legacy for the next generation, but also for the one right now. I don't think anybody's getting off here, but it certainly is a very important reminder of what our responsibility is, and you know, it lengthens your timelines. You know, when you see those scientific projections, you know what the thing's going to be like in 2050 and 2060. You know, it makes it a lot scarier for me, and I feel the sense of urgency all the more.
How do you sustain that sense of urgency? I think a lot of things that we've seen in the past decade, kind of they peak and then they fall back down. But this is definitely something that has to keep going for a long time. So how do we sustain that?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I went to a session this morning. It was someone from class was speaking from Quebec and from the Quebec student movement, and she was talking about the structure of their student movement, and it's I feel encouraged by the fact that there seems to be a recognition among this generation of activists that there needs to be structure, and there can also be direct democracy. These aren't mutually exclusive. I think from kind of my generation of activists, sort of my big political moment was the Seattle protests and all that, and I think that there was a fetish for disorganization almost, and what we found with that is that you are a blip, right? Because the mood changes. For us, it was 9/11 happened, and then you kind of disappear overnight because you haven't built structures, you haven't built institutions that carry a movement forward even in tough times. And what I see in this generation coming up is that they have learned from some of our mistakes. They're incredibly committed to direct democracy, but they also understand the need for institutions and structure. And I think that is really relevant to your question about urgency, because if you don't have structure, then you sort of have to be in that sort of panic state or fight or flight state or freak out mode all the time, and no one can sustain that. There's always going to be ebbs and flows, but you need institutions that can carry you through.
What do you think can be improved on the international level? For example, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is coming up in Doha, Qatar. And I was just wondering, a few delegates from Canada will be going, and I was wondering what you think what kind of impact youth should have on the international level.
I have to admit that I'm getting pretty cynical at the UN conferences. And I think everyone is, and at this point I don't know how we rationalize the carbon, because everybody's going saying we know nothing's going to come of it. I mean, at least with Copenhagen, there was a sense of, okay, there is a chance that there could be some kind of a breakthrough here. But since Copenhagen, everybody's been going to these summits saying they're going to fail. All we're maybe doing is holding the line on common but differentiated responsibility, and that's it. It's not enough, and they're so expensive that I really do question whether this is where the climate movement is anymore. I know people still, it's the best we've got. It's better than unilateral actions by countries using, geoengineering. But I'm not sure that it's where civil society should be pouring its energy. It's very, very expensive for civil society to be flying people to Doha in huge numbers. And yeah, I mean, there are incredible moments, like the incredible moment in Durban where a young Canadian made just an absolutely kick-ass speech on behalf of the youth of the world, and that was extremely satisfying to see. But, what did that change ultimately? Is that the forum for change? And I think that at this point we have to admit that it's not.
Back to the stuff before. The institutional structures we have now, the government, things like that, are they capable of carrying forth the urgency necessary, or do we need new ones?
The international structures?
International work.
I think what we're facing is an absolute institutional failure. I mean, look, all the UN is a collection of governments, right? And the governments have failed. So, I mean, this hope that the UN would be something so much better than the sum of its parts is, it's a little naive. And I think particularly what's happened since Copenhagen is that the economic crisis has trumped the climate crisis. And so you have even the countries that were the supposed sort of shining lights of the UN process are abandoning their commitments. And to me, what this really points to is the need to have an integrated movement that is both an economic justice movement and a climate justice movement, so that it's indivisible. Because so long as it is divisible, the environment will lose, and it is losing.
In your book, The Shock Doctrine, you talk a lot about Latin America and the shock and awe policies there. Are we in a moment of that right now in Canada?
Well, I mean, I think climate change is potentially one of those moments. And the way I see this crisis is that I think it's the biggest crisis humanity's ever faced, and not that it's scarier than nuclear war, but in its complexity and in its pervasiveness, I think it is the largest crisis we've ever faced, and it is certainly not immune to what I read about in the Shock Doctrine, which is the exploitation of crisis to benefit elites and to consolidate power and to widen economic divides. I end the Shock Doctrine with New Orleans and this, the image of that city underwater and the people who have money, who have resources, able to get out, and often in a sort of through a kind of privatized rescue, and the people who do depend on the state, but the state has failed, the state has abandoned them, and they're left on their roofs holding signs that say help. Is this a glimpse of our future? And that chapter is called Disaster Apartheid, and with climate change, we will see more and more of this, and we're seeing that there are many examples of it, whether it's the so-called market solutions for climate change, carbon trading, the privatization of the forest, geoengineering. I mean, all of these are sort of privatized attempts to profit from this crisis, and there are many examples of this. We could write a whole book about it. But what I'm trying to concentrate on is how we cannot repeat the mistakes of the past, because what I would say about the Shock Doctrine is it can only work if we don't understand this tactic. I mean, the whole tactic is to take advantage of people in a state of panic and fear, and tell them we have no choice. And I think people are getting so much savvier, and you see this with the response to austerity in Europe. The young people in Greece and Spain, I mean, they know exactly how crisis is being exploited by elites in order to screw them. They've been aware of it since the beginning. Is Harper doing it in this country? I don't think he can do it quite in that way. I think people are too aware of it. And certainly that was attempted in Quebec, and they didn't get away with it. So we are becoming more resistant to these tactics, and the more we know, and the more we talk about it, the more we name it, the less effective they are. But more than that, we have to have our own alternatives, our own